Let's talk about the Alienware A51M. This laptop exceeded a lot of my expectations. It's the best performance you can get from a laptop for gaming and could even supplement a workstation. I've designed an in-depth teardown guide showing you step-by-step how to upgrade or pull apart the machine. We'll examine temps, noise levels, and we'll do an in-depth gaming test and explore the pros and cons of the machine, including overall performance and thermal throttling. This video is designed to answer all of your questions, and I'll be standing by to reply to all comments, so if you do have a question, be sure to ask it. Up next, an unboxing of the device. Pull apart the tape here, gain access, and here we have the box. We got the chargers. There's two chargers, we'll talk about that a little later. Got some more charging cords, nothing special here. And then we have the device. Dell is not known for their unboxing experience. However, this is because I did get the refurbished model and they don't really put a lot of work into their refurbished boxes. If you are looking to get one, that's the way to go. You can save about 30%. Let's take a moment and just kind of appreciate the overall design. In the past, gaming laptops used to look really ugly and they were just way too flashy. This design is much more minimalist, artistic aesthetics, just looks and feels better. There's also this nice taper effect on the sides that makes it look a little bit thinner. It's actually deceptively thin and it's actually about twice as thick as what it actually looks like, which is kind of cool how they did that. When you feel the device for the first time, you get a nice rubberized texture feel, and overall it just feels like the device is really well built. You got a really nice sturdy hinge. This thing is going to last you a long time. In the past, laptops had a lot of issues with hinges. You open them up and then once you've done it a certain amount of times, the hinges get loose and then they break. This is a pretty heavy laptop. It's about 12 pounds, and when you include the two power bricks, you're looking at about 16 pounds. So I actually have to have a special backpack just to carry this thing around. A lot of gamer laptops just can't let go of the past. I don't know what it is. It's like gamer laptops are designed to cater to like Counter-Strike players or something. I don't know what it is, but when you're looking at the trackpad, it's extremely small, and the trackpads have always been tiny and they've always included these really mushy buttons. It works and it's alright, but I don't like it. When you're gaming on this keyboard, it is unbelievable. The keys move really fluidly. They have this nice rubberized textured feel. And overall, they just did a good job with this keyboard. They didn't follow with what everybody else was doing. They continued to maintain that classical keyboard feel. And keyboards in the past actually did feel pretty nice. So it's actually nice that they kind of held on to that classical keyboard feel, but also kind of added a modern touch to it. It feels kind of like a chiclet keyboard. It's an old keyboard kind of put together. The screen is where this device also shines. This is a 144 Hz screen with 1 millisecond response time. It has pretty alright colors, nothing really special. For workstation needs, it might be maybe not as good. The thing is, this is a panel if you're a gamer. That's why it's important to have the G-Sync, which prevents screen tearing and has that really fast milliseconds response time and high refresh rate. It's not that you couldn't use it for workstation needs, is that it's not as optimized, and it also just depends on what you're doing. Let's take a look at the gaming on this machine. The gaming absolutely blew my mind. This machine performs as good as my desktop. I have an i9 9900K with a 2080, and this machine features basically the same hardware, and it's all upgradable, so it's really impressive to see this kind of desktop level performance on a laptop. Is just completely unheard of. Alienware kind of has been hinting at this for a long time. Every new generation of laptop they've been releasing has been getting better and better and better performance, and so it's exceptionally neat that it runs so well. As you can see here, I was in a room that had ambient temperatures of about 75, 78, sometimes 80. And I was experiencing thermal throttling, which kind of sucked. But here's the thing, when it throttles, you can't even really tell. And that is a huge breakthrough, because on the previous gaming machines, if you were throttling, all of a sudden your FPS drops, you start lagging, you start losing, and you're wondering why you even have a gaming laptop in the first place. But you're really not running into that with this device. It just performs well almost all the time. It's exceptional. Now, the first few times I played on here, I actually put the machine on my lap. I went over to my brother's house and I was playing some Rust. And you know, it works. You know, you can actually game on your lap. It does get toasty, but that's just kind of the nature of how laptops work. Whatever game I threw at it with max graphics, it didn't matter. The performance was exceptional. I have never seen this type of performance on a laptop. I'm really glad Alienware is at the forefront of this, because if it's not for them, you know, who else is gonna do it? Now, the thing about this device is you have to be in a room that's fairly cool, like 65 Celsius or 70 Celsius. If it's above that, you may start experiencing some kind of thermal throttling. Let's take a look at what kind of ports we have on this device. We have a microphone and a headphone jack, a USB 3.1, a USB-C, which also can work with Thunderbolt, which is great. We've got an air vent on the side, and then we got Kensington lock, and we got an additional air vent on the side again. So you actually have 4 air vents from the sides and the back. You got the 2 power plugs that we were talking about earlier. You got the graphics amplifying port, which is if you want to plug in an additional graphics card, and then a Ethernet, a mini display port for a video, and then an HDMI as well. More ventilation, 2 more USB 3.0 ports. What's a shock to me is that you have this elegant looking machine, and then all of a sudden you pull out your power bricks and these things look like they're from the 90s. They're extremely ugly. There's 2 of them, and one of them is too short, so you get dangling cords. One of these is 180 watts, and then the other one is substantially larger, and it's 330 watts. Charging cords aside though, the device looks great. And actually about 10 years ago, there was MXM graphics modules you can buy that were upgradable, but for whatever reason, I don't know why the community did not adopt them. I think about 10 years ago, there wasn't such a big community of gamers, and the companies weren't really tapping into the community and what they want. Now you have so much community, and you have gamers wanting to really kind of take a stand and talk to these companies and tell them what they want. I'm thermal throttling, but my performance was excellent. I hit about 100 Celsius, and I was still running at 4.5 gigahertz speed, which is unbelievable. It does get kind of loud on this device. Like, this is something you cannot avoid with gaming laptops. They're all going to be loud. There are some gaming laptops that are a little bit quieter. Like if you get some of the lower end entry models, they will perform quieter, and that's because the computer isn't producing as much heat, it doesn't need as much power. So you just have to get kind of a weaker machine for it to be a little bit quieter. But you know, it's so hot that the walls were getting hot and everything around me was starting to get hot. But you know, that's just how it is. You can't have great performance and have it be cool at the same time. Now, even though you can upgrade this device, it's actually somewhat complicated and does take some time. So these first initial screws, you remove them, and then you need like a knife or something to prop up the shell so you can gain your access to the RAM and the hard drives. Over here you have the fans that cool the GPU and the CPU. Then you got some heat pipes. We got a hard drive. This one was actually not an SSD, so I'll be upgrading that. We've got 4 slots for RAM, which is really impressive. Normally you only get 2 slots, so you can get a total of 64 gigs in this beast. You have 2 of these Nvme SSD slots, which is great. So if you want to run in like RAID 0, or if you just want to have tons of drives, you can do it. I really like that. The battery, it's removable. Everything is serviceable and removable and fixable. So you want your device to last you a long time and you want it to have great performance, you can do that on this device. All right, let's upgrade the RAM. So if you've never upgraded RAM before, on a laptop, it's a little different. You have these little metallic pins and you have to kind of push them kind of away from the module, and you have to do it on both sides. So I've done it on the first side, let's do it on the second side. You just kind of push in and out, and then the module will pop up, and now it's in a diagonal state where you can just kind of slide it out, and there is a little notch you have to pay attention to, and then when you're ready you can reinsert your RAM, and then you just have to push down and then it'll snap itself back into place. So it was a little bit extra firm. You have to give it a nice push. Make sure that the notch actually is aligned, because if it's not aligned you risk damaging the pins and possibly breaking the notch, which could break the slot. So always pay attention to the notches. Just take your time. The key is to take as much time as possible. if you're in a rush, you could risk breaking something, and you just don't want to do that. All right, I'm going to put the module back in now. I want to show you how to remove the module one last time from a slightly different angle, and I also want to show you what these RAM modules look like and what it says on them. So this is a Micron based 8GB stick, and it's called a SODIMM based RAM stick, so it's much smaller than what you'd find on a desktop. Now let's take a look at the NVMe SSDs. What's cool about these SSDs is that they have a bracket which has to be removed, and now this bracket actually acts as a heat sink to cool the SSDs, because SSDs actually get kind of hot. And this is actually the first time I've ever seen this. I've never seen a little copper heatsink with a pad on there, which is really kind of neat. You know, it cools it. And this SSD is also really small. I've never seen an NVMe SSD that tiny. Kind of examine this little heatsink here. It's got a little QR code thingy on there. Yeah, it's pretty neat. All right, now let's remove the SSD. So the SSD is held together by basically just one screw, and then it pops up diagonally, a lot like the RAM stick. Now, what kind of bugs me is that you even need a screw in the first place. Why didn't they just adopt how the RAM modules work and use those little metal pins? This one here, this is a Toshiba 256GB, and it keeps my operating system nice and fast. That's where the OS is stored. That's how I boot Windows. Over here, I got a nice up-close look at the actual circuits. You got the transistors there and all the little modules. Really neat stuff, really cool looking. This one gets about 1300 read and 500 megabyte write. The 2.5 millimeter hard drive disk. This thing is extremely slow, and I'm kind of annoyed at how many screws there are overall in this whole dismantlement process. Like, there's 4 screws holding this thing together. The thing about the 2.5 millimeter SSDs is they can just be hanging in there. You don't even need the bracket that it's connected to. Once you remove the screws, remove this little connector, it's actually kind of hard to remove. You got to really put your muscle into it. And now you can access the drive. So here's the drive. This is a 1 terabyte Seagate Fire CUDA drive. And the real culprit here is that it's a 5400 RPM, which is, it's just so slow. I can't believe they even put that in there. It's slow even for a hard drive, and hard drives are already 10 times slower than SSDs, so you're waiting around for your stuff to happen on a PC. You got to remove these 4 screws here to remove the brackets, but honestly, you don't need those brackets in the first place. I would just not even use the bracket system. Just plug your drive in, put it down. You can just let it hang in there. It doesn't even need to be screwed in. It's ridiculous. Let's go ahead and remove the battery now. We've got, I think, about 5 or 6 screws holding this bad boy together. All right, get those screws out of there. This battery is not the maximum limit. I think you can get like a 99 watt. This one also has like a little connector that you need to remove. You kind of have to pull kind of hard. And then once you do that, your battery is now disconnected. 90 watt hour battery, and it's kind of got this weird shape to it. Since the battery is removed, we can go ahead and start dismantling the whole machine. And there's this plastic bracket thing that needs to be removed. Now, I don't know why this bracket is even here. I guess it's probably for stability reasons. And there's just a ridiculous amount of screws. Like, they need to make this only have 5 screws or 10 screws or something along those lines. Or just don't use screws. Have everything snap in together, you know? Just learn from the Japanese how they snap everything together, you know, just make it less complicated. They're just kind of over-engineering a lot of the things. Like you can't even remove this plastic bracket unless you remove the SSD. And then you also got to remove the wireless card just to gain access to the CPU and GPU. You know, it's really stupid to have to remove all these other components just to get to something. Like, I should be able to get to whatever I want without having to remove kind of everything in order. So essentially, to get to the CPU and GPU, you have to take apart almost everything, which is kind of a bad design. Now, I gotta hand it to Dell. This is the first time they've done something like this, and they've taken it up on themselves. This is going to be an expensive project for them, and you know, who knows? Maybe they'll terminate it. I think that now is actually the right time for gamers to get a system like this. So I think that it'll actually last. But it is an expensive endeavor, and the first products they release, they're not going to be perfect. Like it's going to take time for them to work out the kinks, to reduce the amount of screws. Like you're literally finding screws everywhere. There's screws on the back of the ventilation systems, and there's 4 screws that hold it together for this little plastic back hinge. And then you got to use a little prop tool to kind of slowly prop everything out and then gain access. And you got to do it in a couple different spots there, and then it just kind of slides out. There we go. And the thing that was really driving me mad is that there's a lot of these flat-based wires that are just kind of glued to the chassis, and you have to kind of rip them back. And I mean, it makes sense, because how else are they going to have a wire? But there just should be some kind of module that snaps into place that doesn't require a bunch of loose wires kind of going randomly all over the place. You then got to unplug your SSD, and then you have to kind of thread the wire kind of back, and then you just kind of keep finding more and more wires. And this is where I realized, I was like, oh wait, I have to remove the wireless card? Like what? Like who needs to remove the wireless card, like ever? This is very surprising that I had to remove this. So I'm like, okay, well, I guess I'm just gonna remove it. And then I'm like, oh wait, there's like 3 more screws holding the bottom bracket together. So I zoomed in on that, and I was like, okay, let's get this removed. Once you remove these 3 screws, there's an additional screw, the L12 screw, which holds, I think, it's basically a connector for the motherboard. So I'm like trying to remove this plastic bracket, and I'm like, oh wait, I gotta remove that too. At least this has a nice little pull tab. I really appreciate that. You know, little things like that. The more they think about the user, the more I can really appreciate Dell's approach to this. Like, even though it's complicated, like, you just got to give them time. All right, so now you should be able to remove this. There may have been maybe one more screw that I missed. It's actually really easy to miss some of these screws. And then you have to just kind of take the wiring out, make sure everything's unplugged, and then you kind of wiggle it out. Now, even though this plastic bracket is kind of annoying, I kind of think it doesn't even need to be there. Honestly, why is that even there? It's probably there for structural integrity, to kind of hold everything together and to kind of provide some distance between all the areas that are exceptionally hot. But before you can remove that, gotta remove that wireless card. And there it is. There's what the wireless card looks like. Killer 1550, pretty cool. And it says Intel on there, probably because it's using like a little Intel CPU or microcontroller to power the wireless card. That's my guess, is why it says Intel on there. It's a diagram of kind of where everything's at. It doesn't show where the CPU or GPU is at, but it does tell you how many screws you have, so you can remember what type of screws go where. So even though, you know, they could have just put this bracket on here with nothing on there, you know, but they actually said, here's where the L12 screws go. Here's where the L8 screws go. Like, they're telling you kind of where everything goes. And I gotta hand them, that's cool. I appreciate that, you know. Even though it was annoying, they found a way to add some value to it. Here you can see that I'm just kind of showing you where all of these loose wires are, and that you should always be gentle in the dismantlement process, because if you rip this or tear this is not a component that you're going to be able to find somewhere else. All right, let's remove this heat sinks here for the CPU and GPU. There's 2 power cords that are connected to the motherboard that you'll need to remove, and then there's some screws. And what's neat is that the screws holding together the GPU and CPU cooling systems, they cannot be lost. These screws do not come out. They're special type of screws that stay with the system. All right, so let's remove these screws. And these screws, you know, I kind of wish they just used these types of screws everywhere, you know. Why do you want to have screws that can get lost? It's probably something to do with them trying to balance out the cost. Like, some screws, it's much more devastating if you lose them. And these particular ones, I think they just want to make sure you absolutely don't lose them, because if you lose a screw, then you're going to put the heatsink on. It's not going to be on all the way. It's not going to cool the GPU and CPU, and it could actually cause them to overheat and possibly even damage them. Those are what the little non-removable screws look like. Pretty cool stuff. You also have thermal paste and then these heat pads that go on the VRMs. So basically there's tons of little modules around the CPU and GPU that also get fairly hot. Those need to be somehow integrated into the cooling system as well. And there you have it. There's the 2080 GPU. And then you have the CPU, the 9900K. Absolutely amazing CPU. I love this one in my desktop, and I love being able to use it in a laptop. And then this 2080 just tears through games. God, I love this card. It's really neat how small it is. And Dell's custom design, they've done a great job making this removable and making it, serviceable and pretty cool. So there's, I think, about 5 screws that hold this in place. And what you got to do is first you got to remove the screws around the perimeters, and then there's 2 screws that hold together the PCI Express bus. All right, let's learn how to upgrade the CPU. The CPU is inside of a cage. This is basically a socket with like a metal enclosure that goes on top. The way to get it open is you have to push down on this lever, push down and push out. And remember, this lever is actually pressurized, so there's no way to open up and access it unless you slowly depressurize the lever and just kind of lift up. And there you go. So I'm lifting it up, and then as you drag it back, the cage gets further away from that centralized screw that's kind of keeping the cage together. And then you can push the lever back and it lifts the cage, and then you get access to your CPU. Now, the biggest annoyance during this whole process is all that gunk you see. That's called thermal paste, and oftentimes thermal paste is extremely toxic, and you don't want this thermal paste falling into random areas. You have to be very careful that it's not just going to randomly fall into the CPU socket itself. And the important part about upgrading them is that you want to make sure that the triangle matches and that these little half circular notches are in place properly, because if they're not, if you upgrade the CPU and you put it in with the incorrect orientation, it's not going to work, and it could possibly break the socket as well. And so what I'm going to do here is I'm going to try to lift up the CPU out of there. I might even clean up some of the gunk, because you don't want this gunk falling into random areas. And then you can actually reuse some of this old paste, and you can just kind of scoop it back into the center, and you can reuse it if you'd like. However, once you remove it, the paste can sometimes be too old or too rigid and not liquidy enough, and so it just doesn't work. So here I'm wiping up the old paste, and I'm kind of pushing it back into the CPU there because I don't want it falling off. And you want to be pretty gentle when you're doing this. You also don't want to contaminate the actual paste itself. I'm using a special cloth that won't leave any residues, and I'm also kind of looking out for paste falling into specific areas. And I'm just going to kind of grip the edges, and I can remove the CPU this way. Remember, don't apply any pressure to the CPU at all. As you're removing it, you're just lifting it up, and then look inside the socket and look on the edges to make sure there isn't any thermal paste. If there is, just kind of wipe it up and you should be fine. That right there is getting dangerously close. I want to make sure that that doesn't fall in there. So I'll be kind of mopping that up. And then here you can see all the pins are intact. They're extremely fragile, and you want to make sure you watch some more tutorials and kind of watch how I show you how to do this, because this is the easiest thing to screw up. Once you screw up one of those pins, you really can't fix that. Like, that is not replaceable. You might as well, like, your whole motherboard is pretty much ruined. When you're putting the new CPU in, you can kind of plop it in there, just kind of almost drop it in there right before you actually touch the pins. You're almost just dropping in there. I actually put it in there crookedly, so here I am just adjusting it very slightly. I'm just kind of pushing it kind of into place, not applying pressure to the pins. The pins themselves can hold up the CPU, but you don't want to apply any pressure, and you want to make sure the notches and the triangles are all aligned, because if they're not, again, it's just really, not in the correct position, and it won't work if it's not properly in place. So here I'm going to reuse some of the old paste. There's a guitar pick that I found that came with my iFixit. I was kind of wondering why this was here. I guess it's for opening up devices. So what it is it's a iFixit toolkit, and it has these little guitar picks. And so here I'm just kind of grabbing the thermal paste from the sides, and I'm putting it kind of back into the center. Now this is because the thermal paste is used to conduct the heat, and I want some of that thermal paste kind of back into the center so it can work again. I might even apply some of my own paste to kind of supplement some of the paste that's been lost or may have kind of fallen off from the sides. So once you have the CPU in there, the process is basically the same thing but reverse. You want to put the cage down, lift the lever up, and then you're going to feel tons of resistance as you're pushing down, and then you push out and then back in to make sure that that lever is locked into place and that it secures the CPU properly in its position. Then kind of from the center, I'm going to mop up some of the thermal paste. Now the reason I want to mop some of this up is because, one, now there's tons of gaps. So even if you are reusing the old thermal paste, there's tons of bubbles and gaps in it. So you want to supplement some other thermal paste to make sure that it's going to properly cool it. As you can see, there's the i9 9900K CPU. This is just a beast of a CPU. I love this thing, and the performance is just unbelievable. And also, I'll be doing the same thing on the video card. I'm going to mop up some of the sides, and then just apply the heatsink. Now you can actually just put the heatsink back on, but there might be a chance it won't cool it as good, which would really suck. All right, let's examine upgrading this GPU. So you want to remove these 3 screws that are holding it into place, and then you have 2 screws that hold the PCI Express bus together, which is kind of weird. It's like, why is there screws holding that together? But I guess that's just the way they designed it. So you get all that removed, a total of 5 screws holding this GPU together. And then once it's removed, you want to kind of flip up the PCI Express cords because they are going to clip, and then you're going to also want to unplug the power. You can kind of lift up and slide out, but then remember that PCI Express cord is going to be clipping it, so you're just kind of going to want to wiggle them off and then just kind of remove it, and there you have it. There's the 2080 GPU. It says here S Taiwan, and probably got some kind of serial number on there, and then Nvidia, which is the company that manufactured this specific GPU. You got some ports, some VRM, some memory chips, tons of really cool stuff to look at. Really awesome that Dell was able to do this. I really hope that this will encourage other manufacturers to adopt either a similar system or maybe bring back the MXM, because I think MXM was released too early, and so I think it died. All right, and that's what that looks like. And there's a heatsink on the back of that. Now I wonder why there's a heatsink there. I guess there's some module that gets really hot. There's what the PCI Express ports look like. They got some transistors and then a bunch of other modules. Really neat stuff. The best value in this machine lies in getting one of the cheapest models and hoping to upgrade later down the line. I got the 2080 and the i9 9900K, and there shouldn't really be anything that I can upgrade to, and there doesn't really exist any better components. Now, all right, next up we're going to apply our thermal paste. So this is just thermal paste that I got with some of my heat sinks from the past, and I'm just going to put like half a pea or a pea-sized amount right onto the main chip there, and sometimes you can even kind of swirl it around the center. But you know, you're gonna put the heatsink on there and it's gonna spread it around. I actually put a little too much on there, so I'm kind of mopping some more of it up and I'm gonna put it onto the CPU.